The summer of 1978 in Boulder, Colorado, was a tapestry of sunshine and youthful ambition. Yet for Emily and Daniel, it held the deceptive promise of an adventure that would never fully unfold. They were two bright stars, fresh out of college, eyes gleaming with the boundless optimism of a generation that believed anything was possible. Emily, with her fiery red hair and infectious laugh, was an aspiring photojournalist, her camera always at the ready to capture the world's hidden beauty. Daniel, steady and thoughtful, was a budding architect, his mind always constructing intricate designs, both on paper and in his dreams for their shared future. Their week-long expedition into the majestic Rocky Mountain National Park was meant to be a celebration of their newfound freedom, a brief escape into nature's grandeur before diving headfirst into the demands of adulthood. Their preparations had been meticulous, a testament to Daniel's methodical nature. Maps were pored over, gear checked and rechecked, and every contingency discussed. They chose the iconic Snowmelt Trail, a path renowned for its breathtaking vistas and, crucially, its perceived safety. Local guides and seasoned hikers often praised it as an accessible route, perfect for those with moderate experience, promising picturesque meadows, crystalline streams, and sweeping alpine views without the perils of high-altitude climbs or treacherous passes. They had consulted with park rangers, reviewed weather forecasts that promised clear skies and mild temperatures, and packed their provisions with the confidence of seasoned adventurers. There was no hint of the malevolence that awaited them, no whisper of the shadows that lurked beyond the trailhead. The morning of their departure was a flurry of well-wishes and playful banter. Their small group of friends gathered, waving goodbye with the casual assurance that always accompanies temporary farewells. "Don't forget to send us postcards from the summit," one friend called out, laughter echoing in the crisp morning air. Another joked about Daniel needing to return by the weekend for a crucial football game, while Emily's sister reminded her playfully about a family gathering she absolutely couldn't miss. Emily and Daniel, radiating an almost palpable excitement, grinned and waved back, promising tales of mountain triumph upon their return. They exuded a vibrant energy, a shared enthusiasm for the journey ahead, utterly oblivious to the fact that this seemingly ordinary departure was, in reality, a passage into a silence that would stretch for decades, leaving behind only questions and an enduring, chilling mystery. The hum of the highway faded into a distant memory as Emily and Daniel left the paved roads behind, the air growing crisper, infused with the scent of pine and damp earth. The iconic entrance sign to Rocky Mountain National Park loomed, a grand gateway to an untamed wilderness that promised both solace and exhilaration. Their worn Subaru, packed to the brim with gear, navigated the winding mountain roads, each turn revealing a new vista of towering peaks and dense evergreen forests. Excitement buzzed between them, a shared anticipation that swelled with every passing mile. Daniel, with a quiet competence, drove the familiar stretches, his gaze occasionally drifting to Emily, who sat beside him, camera ready, already capturing the fleeting beauty of sunlight dappling through the trees. Their first few days on the Snowmelt Trail were a dream painted in vibrant greens and blues. The path, true to its reputation, unfolded with gentle ascents and descents, leading them through sun-drenched meadows bursting with wildflowers that trembled in the gentle breeze. Crystal-clear streams, fed by ancient glaciers, murmured softly as they crossed, their cold embrace a welcome respite from the midday warmth. Each evening they would find a secluded spot to pitch their tent, the quiet crackle of their small camp stove the only sound disturbing the pristine stillness. Daniel, ever the planner, ensured their camp was secure, while Emily, with her boundless curiosity, would spend hours photographing the intricate details of nature, a dew-kissed spiderweb, the textured bark of an ancient fir, the kaleidoscope of colors at sunset. Emily's journal, a leather-bound notebook she carried with the reverence of a sacred text, became a vivid chronicle of their journey. Her elegant script filled page after page, not just with observations but with emotions, She wrote of the unparalleled serenity they found in the mountains, a profound sense of detachment from the anxieties of the world below. She described the simple joys, the earthy taste of their instant coffee brewed over an open flame, the warmth of the sun on their skin as they hiked, the breathtaking spectacle of stars that glittered with an intensity she had never witnessed in the city. There was a pervasive sense of peace, a profound connection to the wild heart of Colorado that permeated her entries. She noted Daniel's quiet contentment, his deep breaths of the pine-scented air, and the rare, unrestrained smile that would light up his face when he pointed out a distant hawk circling high above. They felt utterly safe, enveloped by nature's embrace, their chosen route living up to its promise of a gentle, unforgettable escape. The idea that anything could threaten their idyllic solitude seemed utterly preposterous in such a pure and undisturbed realm. As the midpoint of their week-long trek approached, the idyllic tranquility of the snowmelt trail began to subtly shift, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. The crisp, clean air that had felt so invigorating now carried an almost imperceptible edge, a faint whisper of unease that Emily, with her sensitive nature, was the first to register. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, initially brushed off her observations as the natural jitters that sometimes accompany prolonged solitude in the wilderness. Yet even his steady resolve would soon be tested. The first tangible disruption to their peaceful rhythm occurred on their fourth day, as they navigated a less traveled fork of the main trail, drawn by Emily's desire to capture the unique light filtering through a stand of ancient aspens. They had been alone for hours, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and their own footsteps, when a figure emerged from the dense pines ahead. It was a man, seemingly out of place, not dressed in the typical brightly colored hiking gear or carrying the familiar backpack of a day tripper. His clothing was drab, weathered, almost blending into the forest, and he moved with a silent, almost predatory grace. He carried no visible hiking poles, no water bottle, just a worn, utilitarian sack slung over his shoulder. Their usual instinct would have been to offer a friendly greeting, a nod of shared camaraderie on the trail. But as the man drew closer, a cold stillness emanated from him. His eyes, partially obscured by the brim of a grimy baseball cap, seemed to bore into them, devoid of warmth or recognition. He didn't offer a smile or even a glance away, instead maintaining an unsettling, intense stare as he passed, his steps barely disturbing the fallen needles. The air grew heavy with an unspoken tension, and Emily felt an involuntary shiver trace down her spine despite the warmth of the sun. He simply continued on his way, disappearing as silently as he had appeared, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. Later that afternoon, as they sought a spot to camp, Emily noticed something peculiar. Scattered here and there, along what she had believed was a well-marked section of the trail, were small, unnatural cairns, stacks of rocks that didn't look like the usual trail markers. They were rough, almost haphazard, and seemed to point in directions that diverged from their printed map. She pointed them out to Daniel, who, after a moment of confusion, dismissed them as remnants of past, unofficial detours, or perhaps even child's play. Yet Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were deliberate, a clandestine language in stone. There was also a faint, almost metallic smell on the breeze, a scent that didn't belong to the forest but rather to something industrial, something out of place. It was fleeting, easily attributed to a trick of the wind, but it added to the growing undercurrent of disquiet. Their journal entries from that evening, usually filled with the wonders of nature, carried a newfound caution, a subtle shift from blissful immersion to a quiet, unarticulated sense of being watched. The mountains, which had felt like a protective embrace, now seemed to hold secrets and perhaps silent, unwelcome company. As the predetermined date of their return drew closer, a creeping dread began to settle over the families and friends of Emily and Daniel back in Boulder. Initially, their absence was met with a dismissive wave of the hand, a shrug, and a casual assumption that the pair, perhaps caught up in the breathtaking beauty of the Rockies, had simply extended their stay by a day or two, losing track of time in the blissful isolation of the wilderness. After all, spontaneous detours and prolonged appreciation of nature's majesty were common among avid hikers. Yet, as the hours stretched into a full day past their expected arrival and then into a second, the lightheartedness began to curdle into genuine concern. Emily's mother, Martha, a woman whose every action was meticulously organized and whose heart was fiercely devoted to her children, was the first to act. Her initial phone calls to their apartment went unanswered. She tried Daniel's parents, who shared her growing anxiety. The laughter and easy banter of their farewell had now been replaced by a gnawing silence. Martha's hands, usually steady and purposeful, began to tremble as she dialed the number for the Rocky Mountain National Park Ranger Station. It was a call made with a heavy heart, a desperate plea for answers that hadn't yet formulated into words. The ranger on duty, a gruff but empathetic veteran named Jim, listened patiently, his voice calm and reassuring as he took down the details: names, descriptions, planned route, expected return. He explained the standard protocol, the grim reality of limited resources in 1978. There were no satellite phones, no GPS trackers, no immediate communication with hikers deep within the vast expanse of the park. Radio contact, even for park personnel, was sporadic and unreliable in many of the remote canyons and high peaks. A missing persons report could only officially be filed after a certain period, allowing for unforeseen delays or changes of plan. However, given the growing concern, Jim promised to dispatch a preliminary team to check the most accessible points along the snowmelt trail, assuring Martha they would do everything within their power. Those first few days of formal searching were agonizing. Park rangers, seasoned by years of navigating the challenging terrain, fanned out across the snowmelt trail. They moved with quiet efficiency, their eyes meticulously scanning every rock, every crevice, every stand of trees. The initial teams were small, composed of dedicated professionals who knew the park like the back of their hands. They searched the designated campsites, the small clearings where a tent might have been pitched, the stream crossings where footprints might have been left. They called out Emily and Daniel's names, their voices carried by the mountain winds, hoping for an echo of a response. As the days turned into a week, and then into 2, the search efforts escalated. Local volunteers, many of whom were experienced hikers themselves, joined the rangers, forming larger search parties. They combed through dense thickets, scaled rocky outcrops, and descended into shallow ravines. The park, usually teeming with visitors, became a stage for a grim, silent drama. Helicopters, rare and expensive to deploy, occasionally roared overhead, their rotors chopping through the mountain air, their presence a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation. Their powerful spotlights pierced the deepening twilight, illuminating fleeting sections of the vast wilderness, searching for any sign of human presence. A discarded piece of clothing, a smoldering campfire, the distinctive bright colors of a tent. But the mountains yielded nothing. The meticulous search turned up no traces of Emily and Daniel. No discarded backpack, no abandoned camping gear, no footprint, no snapped branch that might indicate a stumble or a struggle. Their bright orange tent, which should have been easily visible from the air or from a distance, was nowhere to be found. It was as if the couple had simply vanished, dissolved into the very air they had breathed just days before. The absence of any evidence, any clue, was the most chilling aspect of all. It defied logic, leaving the search teams and their families grappling with an impossible void. They hadn't merely gotten lost. They had seemingly ceased to exist, swallowed whole by the vast, indifferent wilderness of the Rocky Mountain National Park. The initial hope, thin as mountain air, began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, hard knot of despair. The vastness of the Rocky Mountains, once a symbol of untamed beauty, transformed into an indifferent, imposing presence in the weeks that followed Emily and Daniel's disappearance. The initial flurry of activity, the hopeful shouts of search parties, and the droning hum of distant helicopters gradually dwindled, replaced by an unsettling quiet. Every single lead, every remote cabin, every abandoned mine shaft within a 50-mile radius of the snowmelt trail had been meticulously checked, yet yielded nothing but silence. The volunteers, their faces etched with exhaustion and disappointment, eventually returned to their own lives, their goodwill superseded by the chilling reality of a fruitless quest. Only the park rangers, bound by duty and a silent promise to Martha and Daniel's parents, continued their sporadic patrols, their eyes still scanning the familiar terrain with a renewed, almost desperate intensity. For Martha, Emily's mother, the days blurred into an agonizing continuum of hope and despair. She and Daniel's parents, the Millers, formed an unspoken pact, a fragile alliance against the crushing weight of the unknown. They pooled their meager savings, hiring private mountaineers and seasoned local trackers, men who moved through the wilderness with an almost animalistic instinct, hoping their unique skills might uncover what conventional methods could not. These hired professionals ventured into areas too treacherous or too remote for the organized search teams, exploring hidden grottos, scaling sheer rock faces, and descending into the depths of shadowed canyons where sunlight rarely touched. They returned with tales of incredible natural beauty, of challenging terrain, but always with the same report. No sign. No abandoned gear, no makeshift shelter, no even the slightest disturbance that would suggest human presence. The police investigation, which had started with a meticulous examination of the couple's lives, their friends, and any potential adversaries, also reached a frustrating dead end. Every interview, every alibi checked, every phone call traced, confirmed what they already suspected. Emily and Daniel were ordinary young people, loved and admired, without enemies or hidden troubles. There was no runaway note, no argument, no reason to believe they had intentionally vanished. The case, once a high-priority search, slowly transitioned into a cold file, relegated to the dusty shelves of unsolved mysteries. The official designation became Missing Persons, Presumed Deceased, a clinical label that offered no comfort to the grieving families. The official pronouncements, though delivered with professional sympathy, felt like a condemnation, a finality that Martha and the Millers simply would not accept. As the months turned into years, the raw pain of a loss began to dull, replaced by a dull ache of absence. For the families, every ringing phone, every knock at the door carried a fleeting spark of hope, a desperate prayer that this would be the call, the news that would finally bring closure. But the calls never came. The hope slowly transmuted into a persistent, haunting echo. The Snowmelt Trail, once a symbol of adventure and natural beauty, became a place of somber remembrance, a silent monument to two lives abruptly truncated. Among the park rangers, the story of Emily and Daniel morphed into a solemn legend, passed down from one generation to the next. New recruits, fresh-faced and eager, would listen with rapt attention as grizzled veterans recounted the tale around flickering campfires or during quiet shifts at the station. It became a cautionary fable, a reminder of the inherent dangers of the wild, but also of the perplexing human element that could sometimes intersect with nature's indifference. For Jim, the ranger who took Martha's first frantic call, the case remained a nagging presence, a personal failure etched into the landscape of his memory. He retired years later, still occasionally scanning the horizon from his porch, wondering if the mountains would ever reveal their secrets. The mountains, ancient and enduring, continued their majestic cycle. Winters brought heavy snows that blanketed the peaks in pristine white, erasing any faint imprints of the past. Summers thawed the landscape, coaxing forth wildflowers and lush greenery, obscuring any remaining traces of human passage. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying secrets that only the oldest trees might remember. For nearly 2 decades, the story of Emily and Daniel remained frozen in time, a tragic footnote in the park's history, their memory slowly fading from public consciousness, though never from the hearts of those who loved them. The vast, silent wilderness held its counsel, guarding its mysteries with an impenetrable serenity, seemingly destined to never reveal what truly transpired on that fateful summer week in 1978. The relentless march of time, indifferent to human sorrow or lingering questions, carried the world forward. By 1997, 19 years had elapsed since Emily and Daniel's vanishing act in the heart of the Rockies. The vibrant optimism of 1978 had faded, replaced by the digital hum of a new era. For Martha, Emily's mother, and the Millers, Daniel's parents, the passage of nearly 2 decades had brought a profound, irreversible change. The initial, desperate hope, which had clung to their hearts like stubborn mountain snow, had long since melted away, leaving behind a desolate landscape of acceptance and quiet grief. Martha, once a pillar of tireless energy, had been slowly eroded by the constant, unanswerable ache of loss. Her fiery spirit, so reminiscent of Emily's, had dimmed. She and her husband, having exhausted every avenue of inquiry, every private detective, every local clairvoyant, had finally, reluctantly, conceded to the grim reality. They had held a small private memorial service years prior, laying to rest not bodies, but the tortured ghosts of what-ifs and might-have-beens. It was a symbolic act, a painful acknowledgement that their children were gone, swallowed by the vast indifference of the mountains, or perhaps by something far more sinister. The Millers, equally heartbroken, had followed suit, their once lively home now cloaked in a perpetual quietude, a shrine to a future that never materialized. Both sets of parents, their health slowly declining under the weight of their unanswered prayers, had passed away within a few years of each other, taking with them their profound sorrow and the agonizing secret of their children's fate. They died without ever knowing the truth, their final breaths likely burdened by the weight of that eternal question. The close-knit circle of friends who had waved goodbye to Emily and Daniel in 1978 had, like scattered leaves, been swept in different directions by the currents of life. Careers, marriages, children, and new cities had absorbed their attention, drawing them away from the lingering shadow of the past. The occasional phone call might touch upon the enduring mystery, a shared sigh of remembrance, but the raw, visceral pain had dulled into a distant echo, a somber anecdote to be recounted on rare occasions. The memory of Emily and Daniel, once so vivid and immediate, had begun to soften around the edges, transforming into a cherished, albeit tragic, part of their collective youth. At the Rocky Mountain National Park Ranger Station, the file on Emily and Daniel's disappearance, once a thick dossier of maps, witness statements, and fruitless search reports, now resided in the deep recesses of a metal filing cabinet. It was tucked away, marked with a faded, unsolved stamp, among other cold cases that nature or human malice had claimed. New rangers, fresh out of their training academies, might occasionally stumble upon it during an inventory or a slow afternoon. They would pore over the yellowed pages, a sense of quiet awe and solemnity washing over them as they read the details of the elusive mystery. The story of the lost couple of 78 had become part of the park's unwritten lore, a chilling tale whispered during long nights by the fire, a stark reminder that even in seemingly safe wilderness, not all disappearances were attributed to the forces of nature. The majestic peaks of the Rockies, oblivious to the human drama that had unfolded on their slopes, continued their timeless dance with the elements. Winter blizzards raged, burying the landscape under meters of snow, effectively erasing any remnants of the past. Spring thaws unleashed roaring torrents of meltwater, carving new paths and scouring the land, reshaping the very contours of the mountains. Wildflowers bloomed in vibrant defiance, and wildlife continued its ancient rhythms of life and death, indifferent to the human tragedy that had transpired within their domain. The snowmelt trail itself, continuously maintained by park staff, remained a popular route, traversed by countless hikers seeking solace and adventure. Few, if any, of the new generation of visitors were aware of the chilling story associated with its picturesque beauty. The wilderness, with its profound silence and enduring secrets, had effectively swallowed Emily and Daniel whole, their story relegated to dusty archives and the fading memories of a handful of aging individuals. Hope for any resolution had long since dwindled to nothing, a mere wisp of smoke against the vast, indifferent expanse of time and mountain. The autumn of 1997 painted the Rocky Mountains in a blaze of amber and crimson, a spectacular display of nature's artistry. The air, crisp and invigorating, carried the faint scent of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke. It was a perfect day for hunting, a pursuit that demanded patience, a keen eye, and an intimate knowledge of the sprawling wilderness. Billy Thorne, a man whose lineage stretched back generations in the shadow of these very peaks, embodied all these qualities. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his movements as quiet and fluid as the deer he tracked. For Billy, hunting wasn't merely a sport, it was a way of life, a deep-seated connection to the land that had sustained his family for centuries. He knew the park's official trails, but he also knew the countless unofficial game paths, the hidden nooks and crannies where animals sought refuge and where sometimes the mountains guarded their most profound secrets. On this particular day, Billy had ventured deeper than usual, drawn by the faint promise of a prize buck reported to be frequenting an isolated gorge, a place so remote that few recreational hikers ever dared to tread. This was not the Snowmelt Trail, nor any other designated path. This was the raw, untamed heart of the park, a labyrinth of ancient rocks, sheer cliff faces, and a dense, primeval forest that swallowed sound. The canyon floor was a treacherous mosaic of loose scree and moss-covered boulders, remnants of forgotten rockfalls. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above, casting the gorge in a perpetual, eerie twilight. Billy, with his customary caution, moved slowly, his senses heightened, his boots finding purchase on the uneven ground. He was scanning the distant tree line when his foot, almost imperceptibly, caught on a gnarled, exposed root of an ancient ponderosa pine. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell, his hand instinctively reaching out to steady himself against the rough bark of the tree. It was then, as his gaze dropped to where his foot had snagged, that he saw it. Nestled precariously between two massive, moss-covered boulders, partially obscured by a tangle of roots and damp earth, was something utterly out of place. It wasn't a natural formation, nor was it the detritus of a casual camper. It was a glint of glass, dull and murky, barely visible beneath a thin layer of soil and decades of accumulated leaf litter. Curiosity, a trait as ingrained in hunters as their tracking skills, compelled him to investigate. He knelt, his calloused fingers carefully brushing away the damp soil and clinging detritus. What he uncovered sent a peculiar shiver down his spine. It was a glass canning jar, the kind his grandmother used for preserves, but this one was old, its glass discolored by time and moisture. It had been meticulously tucked away, almost buried, its position suggesting deliberate concealment rather than accidental loss. The lid, though rusted, was still tightly sealed, testament to the care with which it had been hidden. Inside, through the cloudy glass, he could discern what looked like a wad of papers, discolored and softened by the damp environment, yet undeniably present. A profound sense of discovery, mixed with an unshakable premonition, washed over him. This wasn't just old trash, this was something significant. The way it was hidden, the sheer improbability of anyone stumbling upon it in such an isolated location, hinted at a deeper story. Billy, a man who had heard the whispers of the mountains, the legends of the lost, felt a strange connection to the object in his hand. He carefully extricated the jar, cradling it as he made his way back through the darkening canyon, his hunting forgotten. He knew, with an instinct born of years spent in the wilderness, that he had stumbled upon a secret the mountains had guarded for too long, a silent testament waiting for its voice to be heard. The jar, a fragile vessel of forgotten time, was his burden to carry, and its contents, he suspected, would finally break the enduring silence of the lost couple of 78. Billy Thorne, with the ancient jar clutched carefully in his hand, made his way out of the remote canyon and back to the familiar, if still sparsely populated, world. The short drive to the nearest ranger station felt impossibly long, his mind racing with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. He wasn't a man given to flights of fancy, but the weight of the jar, the undeniable presence of something profoundly personal and deeply buried, resonated with an almost spiritual significance. He knew, with the quiet certainty of someone deeply attuned to the rhythms of the wild, that he held a piece of history, a voice from the silent depths of the mountains. The ranger station was a small, unassuming building, often bustling with hikers seeking permits or advice, but on this late autumn afternoon, it was quiet, save for the hum of a fluorescent light and the rustle of papers. Ranger Owens, a younger man still navigating the nuances of his mountainous beat, looked up with a start as Billy entered, his seasoned face usually a mask of calm, now etched with an unusual solemnity. Billy laid the jar gently on the counter, its cloudy glass a stark contrast to the polished wood. "Found this out in the Box Elder Canyon," Billy stated, his voice low, his gaze steady. "Buried deep, looks old, and it's got papers inside." Ranger Owens, sensing the gravity in Billy's tone, leaned closer. The sight of the jar, clearly not a piece of modern litter, immediately piqued his interest. He recognized the type of canning jar, common decades ago. A flicker of something, a distant memory, crossed his face. He knew the park's history, the legends that whispered through the pines. He carefully picked up the jar, its unexpected weight a tangible link to the past. He tried to peer through the grime and condensation, discerning only the faint outlines of crumpled, discolored paper. "Box Elder Canyon, you say?" Owens murmured, his voice now hushed. That was deep wilderness, far off the main trails, not a place for casual hikers. "That's quite a find, Billy." He knew about the unsolved disappearances, of course. The lost couple of 78 was a somber legend among the rangers, a cautionary tale passed down through the generations. He had read the official report, the frustrating lack of evidence, the enduring mystery. The year 1978 resonated immediately, a chilling connection to the date engraved in the park's unsolved files. The possibility that this unassuming jar could be connected to that cold case sent a ripple of quiet excitement, mixed with trepidation, through the small station. Recognizing the delicate nature of the discovery, Ranger Owens made a series of urgent phone calls. The jar, he decided, was not something to be opened hastily by an untrained hand. It was an artifact, a potential window into a long-closed chapter. He contacted the park's superintendent, then, following protocol, the local sheriff's department, and finally, a university known for its archival preservation and forensic experts. The news, though delivered cautiously, spread quickly through the small interconnected network of those who remembered the 78 case. Within hours, a specialist team arrived. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a meticulous archivist and paper conservationist from a university in Denver, along with a seasoned forensic analyst from the state police, carefully transported the jar to a makeshift lab set up at the park's main visitor center. The air in the usually mundane conference room crackled with anticipation. The process of opening and preserving the contents was painstakingly slow. The glass was old, brittle, and the paper inside, exposed to decades of moisture and temperature fluctuations, was fragile, almost pulpy in places. Dr. Reed, with gloved hands and surgical precision, began the delicate work. She meticulously documented every angle, every piece of surrounding debris, using specialized tools and controlled environmental conditions. The lid, rusted shut, required careful manipulation. When it finally yielded with a soft pop, A faint, musty scent, earthy and aged, filled the air. Slowly, carefully, she began to extract the sheets of paper. They were not neatly folded, but crumpled, pressed tightly together, almost fusing into a single block. Each sheet was heavily discolored, stained with earthy pigments, and brittle to the touch. Some sections were entirely illegible, blurred by water damage. But others, miraculously, had survived, their ink faint but discernible. As the first readable fragments began to emerge under the careful light of the forensic lamps, a profound silence fell over the room. The initial words, though incomplete, hinted at a journal, a personal record. The handwriting, though shaky in places, had a distinct character. And then, a date, barely legible, solidified the chilling connection: July 12, 1978. A collective gasp, soft and reverent, escaped the few witnesses in the room. It was Emily's journal. The long-lost voice had finally been found, resurrected from the depths of the mountain, ready to speak its truth after 19 years of haunting silence. The secrets held within those damp, fragile pages promised to shatter the comfortable narrative of a simple hiking accident and rewrite a tragic chapter in the history of the Rocky Mountain National Park. The waiting was over. The painful revelations were about to begin. The hushed silence in the makeshift lab at the Rocky Mountain National Park Visitor Center was broken only by the rhythmic click of Dr. Reed's camera, meticulously documenting each fragile page. The air was thick with attention that transcended mere academic curiosity. It was the palpable weight of 19 years of unanswered questions, finally poised to reveal their chilling truth. As the initial pages of Emily's journal were carefully separated, scanned, and digitally enhanced, the faint, trembling script began to offer its first coherent narrative, slowly, agonizingly, peeling back the layers of time. The early entries, though water-stained and faded, confirmed the idyllic picture of their first days in the park: the vibrant wildflowers, the serene streams, the feeling of profound peace. Emily's youthful enthusiasm for nature, her keen eye for detail, and her deep affection for Daniel shone through. These passages, however, soon gave way to a subtle shift in tone, a creeping unease that began to manifest in her observations. She wrote of the odd sense of being watched, a sensation she had initially dismissed as a product of her overactive imagination or the solitude of the wilderness. Then came the entry describing the encounter with the stranger on the less-traveled fork of the Snowmelt Trail. Her words vividly painted the unsettling picture. He appeared from nowhere, like a ghost in the trees. Not a hiker, not like us. His eyes, they just held ours. No warmth, no flicker of recognition. It wasn't hostile, not overtly, but it felt deeply unsettling. Daniel tried to offer a greeting, but he just walked past, silent, like we weren't even there. It felt wrong, like we had stumbled onto something private. She described the man's drab, unidentifiable clothing, his lack of typical hiking gear, and the way he blended almost seamlessly into the environment, suggesting a prolonged, almost indigenous presence. Further entries detailed the discovery of the unusual cairns. Emily had drawn a small, shaky sketch of one, a crude stack of stones that deviated sharply from the standard trail markers used by the Park Service. "These aren't natural," she had scrawled, her pen pressing harder into the page. "And they don't lead to anything on our map. Daniel thinks they're old, or just someone playing a trick, but I feel like they mean something else, like they're signals for someone else, or a warning." She speculated about hunters or trappers, but the odd, almost deliberate placement, far from any established hunting grounds, suggested something more clandestine. She even mentioned the faint metallic smell and industrial tang alien to the pristine mountain air, though she couldn't pinpoint its source. The most disturbing revelations, however, centered on a specific remote location Emily had vaguely described as the small clearing near the abandoned prospector's lean-to, just off the old miner's ridge. She recounted how, drawn by a distant, unfamiliar sound, perhaps a faint rhythmic thumping that seemed out of place in the quiet wilderness, they had veered slightly off their planned route. What they stumbled upon was not a natural occurrence, nor a sanctioned park activity. Emily's entries, though fragmented and written with increasing urgency, began to describe an improvised, almost crude encampment. "It wasn't a campsite, not like ours," she wrote, "more like a hideout, tucked into the trees, almost invisible. A tarp, a makeshift fire pit, but mostly things that didn't belong." She mentioned tools that looked heavy and industrial, not typical for mountain living, and a faint, persistent odor that was definitely not natural. The men, 2 of them, always 2, were described as having a rough, unkempt appearance with wary, suspicious eyes that never quite met theirs directly. They were clearly not hikers or typical park visitors. Emily's narrative shifted from observation to a creeping sense of dread. She wrote about Daniel's growing discomfort, his quiet attempts to steer them away from the area to pretend they hadn't seen anything, but it was clear even then that they had been seen. The atmosphere, once open and free, was rapidly becoming charged with an unspoken, looming threat. The forensic analyst, tracing the faint lines of ink, noted how the writing became more rushed, more desperate with each subsequent entry. The meticulous detail that characterized Emily's earlier observations gave way to a raw, emotional narrative of fear. The initial, odd sense had escalated into a terrifying certainty. They had stumbled upon something deeply secret, something illegal, something these men desperately wanted to keep hidden. The majestic beauty of the Rocky Mountains, which had cradled them in its embrace just days before, had unwittingly led them into the heart of a human threat far more dangerous and unpredictable than any natural peril. The journal, a silent observer for 19 years, was now screaming its revelation. Emily and Daniel hadn't been lost to the wilderness. They had been captured. The words on Emily's journal pages, now painstakingly restored and displayed on a digital screen, formed a chilling narrative that sent tremors through the small room. The initial fear described in the previous entries escalated into a stark, horrifying reality. They were no longer free. The fragile paper, scarred by time and moisture, now bore witness to their captivity, each word a desperate cry across the decades. Emily's writing, once flowing with youthful exuberance, grew increasingly erratic and terse, reflecting the sheer terror and confusion that must have consumed her. She recounted the moment their initial apprehension turned to stark dread. After their accidental discovery of the hidden encampment and the unsettling encounter with the 2 men, Emily and Daniel had tried to quietly retreat, feigning disinterest, hoping their brief intrusion would go unnoticed. They had attempted to circle back to the main trail, their every step heavy with an unspoken urgency. But the men, described by Emily as ghosts in their own domain, had appeared again, seemingly out of nowhere, blocking their path. There was no violence, no overt aggression at first, just an imposing presence, a silent, unyielding blockade. Emily's journal conveyed the chilling realization that these men were not simply reclusive, but possessive, territorial. They were not hikers, not hunters, not even park rangers. Their presence was a profound violation of the park's regulated environment, their motives deeply opaque. Emily wrote of the cold, flat eyes of one man, whom she briefly referred to as the quiet one, and the nervous, almost twitchy energy of the other, who seemed to be the more dominant figure, though he rarely spoke. The journal described how their essential gear was systematically taken from them. The detailed park map, the compass, the lighter, Daniel's multi-tool, and, most crucially, their small, hand-cranked radio. Emily's camera, however, remained untouched, perhaps dismissed as a harmless toy. The act of confiscation was not violent, but firm, deliberate, an unmistakable assertion of control. They were not robbed of valuables, but stripped of the means to navigate, to signal, to escape. This detail resonated profoundly with the forensic team. It wasn't a random act of criminality, but a calculated move to isolate and incapacitate. The days that followed, as documented in Emily's increasingly desperate hand, were a horrifying descent into psychological torment. They were not physically harmed in the brutal sense, but their freedom was absolutely, irrevocably stolen. They were held in a rudimentary, almost unseen shelter deeper within the canyon, a place Emily could only describe by the distinctive, unnatural smell that permeated the air there, a mix of damp earth and something metallic, almost chemical. This detail again piqued the forensic analyst's interest. What kind of hidden operation could produce such a scent? The journal entries revealed that Emily and Daniel were forced to perform manual labor. Emily wrote of endless hours moving rocks, clearing brush, and digging. The tasks were arduous, physically draining, and seemingly without purpose, though she speculated they were contributing to some larger hidden construction or concealment. There was no explanation for their detention, no ransom demands, no coherent conversation. The men communicated in grunts, gestures, and terse, emotionless commands. This lack of motive was perhaps the most terrifying aspect for Emily. They were pawns in an unknown game, their lives suddenly dependent on the whims of individuals whose intentions remained chillingly inscrutable. Emily's words spoke of the crushing boredom, the constant, gnawing fear, and the desperate attempts to understand their captors. She tried to discern their purpose, their reasons for hiding so deep in the wilderness, for holding two innocent hikers. She noted subtle observations, the men's limited provisions, suggesting they were not self-sufficient for extended periods, perhaps relying on occasional visits from the outside. She also mentioned the night Daniel tried to sneak away, an attempt that ended in failure, though she spared the details of the recapture, hinting only at Daniel's visible despair afterward. The incident solidified their understanding of the futility of resistance. The psychological toll was evident in her deteriorating handwriting, the smudged ink from what might have been tears and the increasingly fragmented sentences. Her fear wasn't just for herself, but for Daniel. She wrote of his quiet strength, his attempts to reassure her even as his own spirit seemed to falter. She was documenting their slow suffocation, the draining of their hope, as they were stripped of their dignity and their future by forces they could neither comprehend nor fight. The mountain, once their sanctuary, had become their prison, and the human element, so often overlooked in the vastness of nature, had proven to be the ultimate, most terrifying predator. The final pages of this section of the journal became a testament to their unyielding will to survive, even as the shadow of a grim fate began to loom with terrifying clarity. Emily, with a remarkable resilience, was determined that if their voices were silenced, their story would somehow one day be heard. The forensic team, their faces drawn with a mix of exhaustion and grim fascination, knew they were nearing the end of Emily's narrative. The latter pages of the journal, the ones Emily had so desperately tried to protect from the elements, were the most fragile, the most damaged. Dr. Reed worked with almost unbearable slowness, her breath held, her movements precise as a surgeon's, aware that a single misstep could obliterate the final critical pieces of information. Each successful separation of a page, each digital capture of a fragment of text, felt like a triumph against the relentless forces of time and decay. What emerged from these last, tortured entries was a horrifying confirmation of their deepest fears. Emily's handwriting, once so neat and expressive, had deteriorated into a frantic scrawl. Words crammed together, sentences fragmented, interspersed with raw, primal bursts of emotion. It was the writing of someone teetering on the precipice of despair, yet clinging to a sliver of hope that her truth, their truth, would somehow endure. She wrote of their dwindling supplies, the constant hunger and the pervasive cold that seeped into their bones. The men, their captors, were becoming increasingly agitated, their previous silence giving way to terse, whispered arguments between themselves, though the content remained incomprehensible to Emily and Daniel. There was a sense of urgency in their captors' movements, a palpable shift in their demeanor that hinted at a closing window of opportunity, or perhaps a growing danger to themselves. Emily's entries suggested they were being moved more frequently, deeper into the bewildering labyrinth of the canyon, always shrouded in shadows, always away from anything resembling a trail or a clear landmark. The faint, metallic, almost chemical odors she had noted earlier intensified, becoming a pervasive, sickening presence. One chilling passage, barely decipherable, spoke of a final task, a forced march to an unknown destination where they were made to dig. Emily's words, though blurred, conveyed the terrifying realization that this was not merely labor, but something far more sinister. She wrote of the pit, and a sense of finality that gripped them both. It was clear she understood with a chilling certainty that this was not a prelude to their release. Then came the moment of profound clarity, a desperate act of defiance against impending oblivion. Emily's last coherent thoughts were not of escape, but of witness. She wrote of Daniel's quiet resolve, his strength in their shared terror. Together, in a moment of agonizing desperation, they had formulated a plan, a final, desperate gamble to ensure their story would not perish with them. They understood their fate was sealed. The men's increasingly erratic and menacing behavior, the desolate remoteness of their new prison, and the sheer finality of their forced labor had stripped away any lingering illusions of survival. Emily's very last, almost unreadable entries spoke of the jar. She described Daniel, despite his weakened state, finding the perfect spot near a distinctively shaped pine tree, its roots gnarled and exposed beneath a cluster of large, smooth stones. With trembling hands, they had sealed the journal inside the glass jar, wrapping it in a piece of their spare tarp to protect it from moisture. Her final words before sealing the vessel were a raw, unfiltered cry from the depths of their predicament. They were a testament to their unwavering desire for justice, a desperate plea to the future. The most powerful, most agonizing sentences were found on the very last page, written with a faltering pen, the ink barely clinging to the aged paper. If you read this note, then we are no longer alive. We don't know who they are, they hold us for reasons unknown. The sentence broke off abruptly, a jagged tear in the paper mirroring the abrupt cessation of their lives, leaving a void that echoed across decades. It was a fragment, a desperate message sent into the void, a final, poignant attempt to communicate their terrifying truth. Beside these final chilling words, Emily had managed to sketch a crude map, a series of hasty lines and symbols indicating the location where the jar was buried. It was a simple drawing, a distinctive gnarled tree, 2 prominent boulders, and an X marking the spot. It was this very sketch that Billy Thorne had unknowingly stumbled upon, the exact landmark he had intuitively recognized, guiding him to the hidden testament. The silence that followed Dr. Reed's final pronouncement of the journal's content was profound, thick with the weight of revelation and sorrow. The air conditioning hummed, but no one heard it. The mystery of Emily and Daniel's disappearance, long shrouded in the enigmatic silence of the mountains, had finally been brutally, unequivocally solved. They had not been lost to the unforgiving elements. They had been victims of a silent, heinous crime, erased by human hands, their last will a desperate plea for their story to be known. The journal, a tangible link to their final moments, was a testament to their courage, a chilling monument to their tragic end, and a silent accusation waiting to be heard. The revelations from Emily's journal, delivered with a somber gravity by Dr. Reed and the forensic team, sent shockwaves far beyond the confines of the Park Visitor Center. The story of Emily and Daniel, once a faded local legend, exploded onto the national stage, igniting a fervent, almost visceral reaction from a public hungry for answers to unsolved mysteries. News outlets, initially skeptical, quickly dispatched reporters and film crews to Rocky Mountain National Park. The quiet town of Estes Park, the gateway to the Rockies, was suddenly swarmed by journalists, their satellite trucks a stark contrast to the rustic landscape. The discovery of the diary, a tangible voice from the past, transformed Emily and Daniel from nameless victims into relatable, tragic figures. Their youthful faces, culled from old family photographs provided by distant relatives, appeared on television screens across the country. The poignant final lines of Emily's journal. "If you read this note, then we are no longer alive. We don't know who they are. They hold us for reasons unknown," became a haunting refrain, sparking outrage and a renewed demand for justice. The public, especially those who had followed the original cold case or had their own experiences with missing loved ones, felt a profound emotional connection to the young couple. The fact that their parents had died without ever knowing the truth only added to the tragedy, deepening the collective sorrow. The case, officially reopened by the state police and the FBI, became a top priority. While the journal provided the what and the how of their disappearance, the who remained a chilling enigma. Forensic experts meticulously examined every detail of the recovered journal, hoping for a stray fingerprint, a microscopic fiber, anything that might lead them to the perpetrators. They analyzed the unique composition of the paper, the ink, and even the subtle residue left by the soil and plant matter that had encased the jar for so long. Every observation Emily had made about the men, their unkempt appearance, their peculiar silence, the strange industrial smell, was scrutinized, cross-referenced with known criminal profiles and historical data. The sketch Emily had made of the jar's burial site became the centerpiece of a renewed, desperate search. Teams of park rangers, law enforcement, and specialized K-9 units were deployed to the Box Elder Canyon. Despite the passing of 19 years, the gnarled ponderosa pine and the distinctive boulders that Billy Thorne had described still stood, silent sentinels to a buried secret. The area was meticulously combed, every inch of ground scanned with ground-penetrating radar, every rock turned. The hope was to find Emily and Daniel's remains, to bring them home, and perhaps to uncover further evidence that could identify their captors. However, the mountains, true to their mysterious nature, continued to guard their ultimate secrets. The intense search yielded no human remains, no sign of the crude encampment Emily had described, no abandoned tools, no definitive trace of the men. The canyon, with its thick undergrowth and shifting terrain, had successfully absorbed all evidence over the decades. It was a disheartening reality. The journal had provided the narrative, but the physical proof needed to identify and prosecute remained stubbornly elusive. The men, whoever they were, had vanished as completely as their victims, leaving behind only the chilling words of a dying girl. The discovery of the journal also ignited a furious debate among locals and experts alike. Speculation ran rampant. Were they reclusive survivalists, living off the grid and violently protecting their isolation? Were they involved in illegal activities, perhaps moonshining, drug cultivation, or even something more sinister, that they sought to keep absolutely secret? Some whispered about extremist groups, others about escaped convicts who had found refuge in the park's vastness. The prevailing theory, fueled by the journal's cryptic descriptions of industrial smells and digging, leaned towards an illegal mining operation or perhaps even something more complex, hidden deep within the park's unmapped caverns. The idea that such a dangerous hidden element could exist within the beloved national park was deeply unsettling to the public, challenging the very notion of a safe wilderness. For the distant relatives of Emily and Daniel, the journal brought a bittersweet form of closure. While the full truth of their suffering was agonizing to read, at least the agonizing uncertainty was gone. They finally knew that their loved ones had not simply succumbed to the elements or become lost in a moment of carelessness. Their disappearance was a tragedy, but one with a human, terrifying explanation. The journal, a testament to Emily's courage and their shared resilience, served as a haunting reminder of the unpredictable dangers that can lurk not just in nature, but within the dark corners of the human psyche. The long-dormant case, now brought back to life by a single desperate act of remembrance, stood as a stark warning, a chilling echo in the otherwise serene canyons of the Rocky Mountains. The final chilling echoes of Emily's journal resonated deeply within the collective consciousness, not just of the small mountain communities but across the entire nation. The story of Emily and Daniel, once a hushed whisper among park rangers, now blared from television screens and filled newspaper headlines, becoming a stark and haunting addition to the canon of unsolved American mysteries. The raw, visceral honesty of Emily's final words, scrawled in terror and defiance, guaranteed that their tragic end would not be forgotten. The official investigation, despite the renewed fervor, eventually stalled once more. The vast, untamed wilderness of Rocky Mountain National Park, which had so long held its secrets, continued to guard them with an unyielding embrace. The meticulous searches of Box Elder Canyon yielded no human remains, no definitive signs of the makeshift encampment Emily described, no discarded tools, and no trace of the two men who had so brutally extinguished two young lives. The forensic team hypothesized that the men, aware of their discovery, likely dismantled their operation and vanished, perhaps dissolving into the vast network of off-grid communities, or simply moving to another remote corner of the country. Without bodies, without a crime scene, without any further physical evidence, the legal avenues for prosecution remained frustratingly closed. The case, though now understood in horrifying detail, settled back into the realm of the cold, a grim testament to the enduring power of anonymity in the wilderness. However, the legacy of Emily and Daniel was far from over. Their story, far from being merely a cautionary tale, transformed into a powerful, almost sacred narrative. At the Rocky Mountain National Park Visitor Center, a small yet profoundly impactful exhibit was created. It wasn't a sensational display of crime, but a respectful tribute to two young adventurers whose lives were tragically cut short. A carefully preserved replica of Emily's journal, its pages digitally enhanced for readability, was displayed under glass, open to the final, heart-wrenching entry. Beside it, framed photographs of Emily and Daniel, vibrant and smiling from their 1978 farewell, offered a poignant counterpoint to the somber words. A brief, dignified plaque recounted their story, emphasizing not just their disappearance but the extraordinary discovery of Emily's testament, a voice speaking from beyond the grave. For the park rangers and local guides, Emily and Daniel's story became an integral, and perhaps the most impactful, part of their educational talks. No longer was it a whispered legend. It was a living, breathing history. When leading groups of eager hikers onto the snowmelt trail, guides would often pause at a scenic overlook, the grandeur of the mountains stretching before them, and recount the tale. They would emphasize the importance of preparedness, of staying on marked trails, but more importantly, of the unpredictable nature of human encounters, even in seemingly pristine wilderness. They stressed the vital, often overlooked reality that not all dangers in the wild come from nature itself. Many visitors, initially skeptical, mistaking the story for an urban legend, would gasp when presented with the faded photographs of Emily and Daniel, or when told of the actual preserved journal. It wasn't a sensationalist ghost story, but a raw, deeply human tragedy. Billy Thorne, the hunter who had stumbled upon the jar, remained a quiet, humble figure. He rarely spoke about his discovery publicly, preferring the solitude of the mountains to the glare of media attention. However, he often returned to the Box Elder Canyon, to the gnarled ponderosa pine, and the moss-covered boulders where he had found the jar. On one of these solitary trips, he carried a small, unadorned wooden cross carefully carved with the initials E and D and the year 1978. He planted it firmly in the earth near the discovery site, a personal, silent memorial. Above the simple inscription he carved two more words: "Forgive us." It was a gesture of profound empathy, a quiet apology for a failure that was not his own, but a deep-seated regret that the truth had taken so long to surface, too late for the parents who had waited in vain. The Rocky Mountain National Park continued to welcome millions of visitors each year, its majestic beauty drawing people from every corner of the globe. The Snowmelt Trail remained a popular choice, its beauty undiminished. Yet, for those who knew the story, for those who had seen Emily's words, the trail carried a deeper, more somber resonance. It was a reminder that even in places of profound natural serenity, there exist unseen currents of human activity, hidden lives, and sometimes the potential for unspeakable darkness. The story of Emily and Daniel became a permanent fixture in the collective memory of the Rockies, a poignant testament to the human spirit's desire for truth, even when delivered tragically. They had gone into the mountains seeking adventure and peace, and while their physical journey ended in horror, their final, desperate act ensured that their voices, their truth, would eventually break through the silence of the wilderness. Their legacy was not just of loss, but of the enduring power of a journal, a fragile glass jar, and the courage of two young people who, even in their darkest hour, refused to be forgotten. The mountains held their secrets, but Emily and Daniel, through their desperate final act, ensured that one of their most haunting tales would forever echo through the canyons, a silent warning to all who ventured into the beautiful, yet sometimes treacherous heart of the wilderness.